Hey, Avi.
Hey Nora, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Giving you
For your
the
patience with the scheduling. I know it's been messy, but thank you.
no problem. We did put a call out to our members to say get him on the show, but I made it clear that it was not. It was very much because of scheduling, and that's what happens when you're the head of the race, right? You become the
Well, I think everyone's got a really intense schedule. Have you seen how Tennille goes at it? Unbelievable pace. My thing was a family health thing on top of the campaign schedule. So I
yeah.
really appreciate your patience and generosity.
Of course. Yeah, no problem. We're going to start in a really easy way. We'll put it. We'll give you the opportunity to give your 30 or 90-second pitch. Why should you be the next leader of the NDP?
Well, because it's not about me, all about me. I think our campaign has been really explicit in rejecting the cult of leadership and the centralization of control in the party in the leader's office, which I think has been a tendency. Really, I think it started under Jack Layton, as much as Jack and the rosy glow around Jack and how much we miss his leadership and charm and warmth and expansive spirit. There's been a gradual concentration of control in fewer hands in the party. And I think there's a big appetite right now from the base, which I'm sure you're hearing from all the wonderful candidates, for more democracy in the party and just a wider community of effort.
Mm.
And that's about theory of change and organizing culture and all the rest. And so I think that our campaign has tried to put in place a different kind of organizing culture in the campaign in the hope that this can lay the infrastructure for the next election.
So, of course, then I have to ask, how are you going to change this? There you are one of a couple of people that have tried or movements that have tried to change the NDP to varying extents. Of course, I think we can call them failures. Actually, I think every time there's been an attempt to reform the NDP, there has been some sort of success, though perhaps not total success. So, how are you going to be able to do that? What's the plan?
I mean, honestly, Nora, I don't know. I don't go into this. This is an experiment, and I don't go into this with some great sense of certainty. I think
Mm,
there's a strong spirit in the grassroots of the NDP that the party has drifted to the center over time, and that's the centralizing and the centrism have sort of gone hand in hand. And it's really a moment where I think the membership is trying to. I think the convention in Winnipeg will be really significant, not just for the leadership choice, but for what happens to this upwelling of desire, because there's for democracy in the party. Like there are so many resolutions coming to
mhm,
convention. Matthew Green and Peter Julian, former MPs with a lot of respect and history, have their initiative, and then there's been the Reclaim NDP, and they're kind of all mixed together. I'm not sure what's happening with that space, but the sort of reform the party space is a movement within the party.
mm.
And so playing our part in the leadership race has been about advancing some specific ideas. We're just about to drop the sort of internal democracy, rebuilding our collective power platform piece, which will be our last major platform release. Um, but I think that the opportunity here is that there is, like, the loss of party status is really profound in how
Mhm.
we don't know exactly how many staff work for the NDP right now, but there are very few people in there trying to keep the party functioning during this leadership race. And there's very little support for the MPs. And so the party's kind of starting from scratch in a way anyway.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I know I didn't really answer the question specifically because I don't think we have a prescriptive, like, we're going to go in there and do X, Y, and Z. I think
Mm.
that part of democratizing is about seeing what happens at the convention and what the specifics are that come from the membership, and hoping that this convention will conventions are really frustrating experiences for NDP members. There seems to be so little time to debate all these momentous policy things. And it's not just internal policy, it's the party's position on things. And I think that there's less, I don't know. I mean, this convention is going to be really important, but it feels like
Mhm.
there's a less coherent group of people in the party because there's so few party staff to run the convention, maybe in the ways that conventions have been run in the past.
I was really surprised when I talked to Rob Ashton. One of his ideas is that the convention should be hiring the national director. So it's certainly those questions of change
Yeah.
are obviously everywhere and in the air. Now, one of the things that I think is interesting, and it's a normal thing in a race. You've got a lot of endorsements. So we see a lot of people who've endorsed you, but I'm very curious about who you endorse. to build this NDP that can have a fighting chance. So like whose team, I know you don't like it to be about you, but you are running for the leader and that's how
Yeah,
this
no,
party works.
accept the
Uh
responsibility with the job, totally.
yeah, yeah. So who's team Lewis? Like who do you have or what kind of people do you have ready to run in an election to win, real frankly, to get that party
I
status
love
back?
that you're pushing the conversation forward. Like, I think there is a natural and I hope understandable tendency to be laser focused on the material conditions of victory. This is a huge country. It's a momentous moment. We have to create a national organization out of thin air. Until
Mhm.
we launched, there was a 5 month behind the scenes battle over the rules for the race. And then we finally launched in September. And up until that point, we couldn't raise or spend a single dollar. So it was like, we've been pretty focused on winning the race. I think in
Mhm.
terms of like thinking about candidates for the next election, um, there's a lot of former MPs who are fantastic, who lost in the wipeout last time, who want to come back. I've talked to a bunch of them. I haven't talked to every single one in a systematic way, but I think a lot of them want to run again. And a lot of them
Mhm.
are waiting to see who the leader is and what the direction of the party is to maybe make that decision. Um, our campaign maybe has more like Rob's obviously has deep roots in the labor movement, in the major trade unions, most of whom have endorsed Rob at the national level, those who have made national endorsements, some notably haven't, as you know.
Mhm.
Um, we have more connections in social movements around, and you and I, and that's how we've known each other over the years, has been through movement world. So in the migrant rights movement, in the economic justice movement, in the climate justice movement, um, in like movement culture has, I think, been our campaign has been more permeable to it. And some of my relationships over 30 years of doing, storytelling and communications work in support of social movements, my films and videos and that and television work. So I think that we maybe have more community organizer potential in terms of candidates in the next election. I think taken a really strong stand against the disqualifying of candidates because of Palestine solidarity, which I've done really publicly and I've said it should never happen again,
Mm.
means that maybe some people who have felt the NDP wasn't as welcoming a space to them might be prepared to step up and run. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tell specific names like, and,
I was kind of hoping you would.
yeah, I
Who's your
haven't.
chief of staff going to be?
Yeah, no, I haven't asked anyone. We are starting to have those conversations as we're in the like final month about like,
Yeah.
okay, transition. What if we win? What is the party? One of the sobering things, Nora, about this moment is that we've built a really large campaign organization. Everybody hopes to,
Mhm.
but it's exceeded our expectations. How many people have signed up? How much money we've raised, and what just the size of our organization. And it's been pretty sobering to realize that our campaign team, paid staff, is probably much larger than the party itself right now,
Oh yeah.
because of how the party has been reduced by loss of status and stuff like that. So
No,
figuring out
absolutely.
who comes through to the other side. I'm also super superstitious, and I don't like to talk about the day after because
Yeah.
we're so focused on the day. But of course, there's planning happening because we're trying to be responsible.
No, I hear that. I hear that. I mean, I couldn't even accept that I had children on the way until I was literally in the delivery room. So, I mean, you're talking to the right person when you're talking
Yeah,
about
I know,
superstition, right? It
for
goes
sure.
deep, right?
Yeah.
Well, and you've talked about labor. I want you to talk a little bit more about labor because it's a bit of the elephant in the room of your campaign. I know you've gotten a lot of endorsements from locals, and there's no shortage of support coming from labor activists.
Yeah.
But the reality about the national NDP is they are run by labor. They're run by the national unions, and how are you gonna woo them or where are you at with some of these unions whether or not they've endorsed Rob Ashton, because I know that it can sometimes be a den of snakes
Yeah.
out there.
I
So where have you guys been with that?
Well, first of all, I don't fully agree that the NDP is run by unions. I think like in 1961, my grandpa and my dad's generation who took like a similar moment for the CCF of like electoral obliteration and created a new party. It was a modern labor party, and bringing labor, the CLC and big unions, public sector and private sector, into the party with seats on the executive, blocks of delegates at convention. That was the forming character of the NDP in 1961. There aren't
Mhm.
as many unions that are still in the party, but very significant forces in the labor landscape. Unifor, CAW, and CEP merge into Unifor. They're not in the party, right? But you have UFCW, United Food and Commercial Workers. You've got the steel workers, which have always been a backbone of the NDP. You've got CUPE, and you've got the CLC and a couple of other smaller unions. But they don't run it. It's a merger of the electoral force and the labor force. And I don't, I don't think union leaders would say that they run the NDP. There's a sense of shared ownership, I hope,
Mm.
but for sure, UFCW, CLC, and Steel have all endorsed Rob,
Mhm.
and so the way that I've responded, I think a lot of union politics is about relationships. I think that Jane McAlevy's organizing for power approach has been really, really powerful force in Canadian labor in the past decade, I would say, including the education workers who almost brought Ontario to a general strike, including the airline section of CUPE. And we've seen some of the surges of labor power been connected to Jane's ideas about organizing. And I
Mhm.
think that, like, there's a way of transposing the power mapping, the one-on-one relationship building, in that model of organizing to an attempt to build relationship with union structures. So I've been talking to some of the union leadership, and connecting. There's some of them have formal processes, like
Mhm.
UFCW had a pretty memorable experience with their candidate endorsement committee. It was kind of hilarious and blunt and not antagonistic, but like we were real about the differences we had. We came out of the gate with a public option for groceries proposal for nonprofit public grocery chain in Canada, and they were like, "How come you didn't call us first?" You know, and it was like, "Yeah, that was a screw up. We should have called you first." But I mean, I've been saying since the beginning they should be staffed by UFCW members. But yeah, I should have talked to the union, and so I apologized. We cleared it
Yeah.
up. There was some laughing and some awkward pauses, but I think that relationship building process is really important. So I've been reaching out to labor leaders. But as you said, we have a lot of locals who have endorsed us, in particular,
Mhm.
really democratic ones. QP79, the inside workers in Toronto, 30,000 city workers, I think the biggest union local in the entire country. We had an endorsement from their president right out the gate, but they have a very democratic process for coming to endorsements, and so the that was a really meaningful one where a base building union actually
Mhm.
its base made that decision. And I think that, so there are different relationships with different unions, but yeah, it's a thing I think about. And I think I've still got some phone calls that I'm waiting to get on. um, but I think that this isn't the first time that unions have been for a candidate all in on one of the candidates who doesn't necessarily win. And I
Mhm.
think there's a deep loyalty to the NDP that on the day after whoever wins, I really hope people will pull together because it's an existential moment for the party. And
Mhm.
races get heavy, and there's been some stuff, there's been some stuff that I think is regrettable in terms of, yeah, things get passionate on election campaigns, on leadership campaigns, and I hope that people can really come together on March 30th because we just really need to. We have much bigger opponents on March 30th than we have in this race.
Yeah. Yeah. The point we are at in this race right now is actually reminding me a lot of where the last month of the campaign was the last time there was a leadership race. And I'm trying to ask similar questions to all the candidates, but because you are the front runner, I think that there's a level of importance to hear really what you're thinking, given there's a very solid chance that you're going to win this. Superstitiousness aside,
Yeah.
what are your criticisms of Jagmeet Singh?
So I, I ran twice in British Columbia, in where I live, and both times, pipelines were an issue. And this gets a little bit at the tensions between the provincial sections of the party, is particularly in government, and the federal party and the relationship there. And that's um, been a kind of a juicy element of debate within the leadership race. Um, because I really deeply believe that we must have differences and negotiate them and navigate them respectfully. But the idea that the federal party should somehow just follow what the provincial sections do when their political contexts are completely different from the national context just doesn't make sense to me. There's never been a one for one fit on policy and issues between the provincial sections and the federal. But Jagmeet,
Mhm.
the way that Jagmeet navigated that, particularly around the issues of pipelines was really hard for us as climate leaders in the party, as British Columbians, where that TMX pipeline, I mean, like the terminus is right there in the Burrard Inlet. Now they're dredging it to increase the capacity of that pipeline. And like we bought that pipeline $40 billion, probably more of public money. It's losing money. If you look at the latest research into the numbers, as I'm sure you did, that Zoe Unker did, and I can't remember whether it was the Tyee or the wherever, I can't remember where she
Mhm.
published, National Observer maybe. Um, the Jagmeet, it was never clear to us, even as candidates, was he for the pipeline? Was he against the pipeline? He finally came
Mhm.
out against it during an election campaign. I think it was the 2021. But the next day, he was sort of saying, well, reporters started asking, what are you going to do with it? And he said, well, when I'm prime minister, I'll have to decide, what to do with the asset. And so suddenly we weren't sure, is he really against it or not? And I
Mhm.
think that communication style that relied on a sort of a kind of a modern communications technocratic approach based on a lot of message testing, based on focus groups, and based on really thread the needle kind of messaging. I found as a candidate in the last election, not everybody knew what the NDP stands for.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
if I have one overarching criticism of Jagmeet, and I think of the NDP federally over the past decade, it's that there wasn't enough clarity around policy. And politics isn't all about policy, but I believe that our campaign has taken the approach of leading with the solutions, so people know really, and using straight talk whenever possible,
Mhm.
so that people really know that we are an alternative that cannot be confused with the Liberal Party. Because when there's uncertainty and people see us supporting the Liberal Party in minority governments in order to extract really important policy wins, and that millions of Canadians with dental care is no question a win. I wish it wasn't through a private insurance company. I think it should be part of our single payer healthcare system. But there's millions of people that get dental care that couldn't afford it before. So that's a real win. And we had to support the damn Trudeau Liberals. And at the same time, Jagmeet needed to be critical of them on all kinds of fronts. But when push came to shove, we would vote with them, right? The caucus would vote. And so, like, what I wondered was, what if we had just told Canada, look, we're fighting for dental care for you. We need the Liberals to implement it and implement it deeply enough and widely enough in all the provinces. So millions of people have actually had their first dentist visit so that the next government can't easily roll it back. And we're going to have to keep voting for them until this is really entrenched, until we win the dental care for you, not the possibility, not the agreement, not the politics of it, the reality.
Mhm.
And then we can bring down the government. Until then, we're going to have to support them. And this is why we're doing it. Canadians never got that explanation. So they saw the NDP supporting the Liberal government and railing against it, and then supporting it when push came to shove on confidence motions. And I think that lack of clarity and straight talk is what hurt us. One of the things
Mhm.
that hurt us. Um, but beyond that, like having run a couple of times, Jagmeet's a really good guy. People felt his sincerity. He was always very well liked, um,
Mhm.
and subject to vicious racism, and projected a kind of grace around those experiences, which I think Canadians admired. And so it's sort of puzzling that he was a popular politician, often more popular than the party, and then but just got stuck at that level of electoral success.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was very critical of his candidacy because I'd worked with the Ontario DP when he was deputy leader, and one of the things that I thought was going to happen, which of course was what happened, was that he was railroaded by the party, frankly, by the people that were managing the party, right? This is a really interesting problem with the NDP, and often in your campaign, I've felt like you're running to be the spokesperson of the NDP rather than its leader.
Mm,
And of course, I look at this as someone that lives in Quebec and has been active within Quebec Solidaire, which is a party that does have spokespeople. But the reality is it is a management position, and I
Yeah.
think that that was one of the difficulties for Jagmeet was he was really not able to manage. He got outmanaged, right?
Mm.
And so, talk to me a little bit about that. What's the biggest bureaucracy you've ever managed? How ready are you to take on like the boring human resources part of this, the navigating the contradictions, right down to the supply and management? I know that certain MPs found out about it from journalists. It didn't
No,
even get
totally.
voted
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
in the caucus. So,
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so my career's been in journalism, and I have launched a lot of TV shows, and so I've built a lot of teams. I've made a couple of feature length documentaries, and for people who work in film and television, there's a lot of team dynamics. You need to hire the right people and get them in the right roles. You have to run budgets of a couple $1 million. There's a lot of that HR stuff, and I've been in smaller organizations, admittedly, sometimes growing to big projects that have given me a lot of that experience. I think if we require that candidates have a particular kind of management experience, we'll get a particular kind of candidate. So maybe I don't feel have the same feeling that you have, that around that thing of like, what is your proven administrative experience? I think a leader um, needs to needs to lead, and that means putting brilliant people in the right positions, being able to listen and build consensus and relationship wherever possible. I think the caucus dynamic is extraordinarily important. I know that there have been leaders like Tom Mulcair who did not engage on a one-to-one basis, on a regular basis with caucus members, and have that deep, like, connective tissue with the people around the caucus table. Or at
Mm-hmm.
least that's my understanding from people who were inside, outside, and around that process. And I think his defining moment of making up policy, right wing austerity policy, on his own in a scrum, and saying that he was going to balance budgets in the first year, which is why we lost the 2015 election, and started, I think, a crisis of identity in the party that extends to this moment in a way, because it was our one shot at victory, and Justin Trudeau passed us on the left. And like that comes from a leadership culture which is like very arrogant and my way or the highway. And I think that someone who really believes in relationship, in teams, and also understands that there is a hierarchy and there are
Mm-hmm.
structures of power, and being clear about how power works in an organization. And my experience in organizations, in the LEAP organization, which was a 5-year experiment in a sort of climate justice NGO, and other experiences, the film and TV work that I've done, has really taught me that um, being transparent within an organization about who has the power to make which decisions is the fundamental clarity that is required to run an organization of respect and coherence. Because not everybody has to agree with every decision, but people really need to know who's making them, and
Mm-hmm.
people need to know that they can be heard, and people need to know that there is a space for debate, and then there is a space for the decision has been made and now it's time to pull together and implement. And so I think it's more about the culture of leadership that I have a lot of experience in than the administering a particular type of bureaucracy. Had I run a company with 150 or 10,000 employees, that's not the same as the federal NDP structurally anyway. The federal
Mm-hmm.
NDP is a caucus, it is a party. There's a leader, and there's a federal council, and there are commissions, and there's an executive. I mean, the particular structure constitutionally of the NDP is unique, and I think that the dynamics and the HR and policy and administrative challenges of that institution are unique to it. And none of us have experience in being the leader of the NDP. um, and obviously, Heather has more experience in the life of an MP. None of the rest of us are elected. But I don't know. I don't know how neatly outside administrative experience ports in. But I believe passionately that understanding relationships, team dynamics, being able to lead with confidence, and being able to listen with even more confidence is are vital skills that I've picked up in the work I've done.
Now, I'm coming to you from Quebec City, And so I have the obligatory question, and I've asked all the candidates this. Do you think that the NDP has given up on Quebec?
Oh, I bloody well hope not. I mean, I actually think from what I've heard about the last couple of election campaigns, there were some people who felt that internally in the campaign planning, there was too much emphasis on Quebec and that there's a way. Yeah, I know.
Yikes.
Um,
not
well,
not
okay,
not Quebec City.
not Quebec City. No, I went to Quebec City for an immersion in June,
Oh yeah.
and I ended up at the Kraken. Do you know the Kraken crew? And
Yep.
the guy who was one of the founders of that place wants to run for the NDP, and we had a fantastic conversation, of like an ex skate punk, incredible chef and bartender who has been fighting Nazis in the street, which I know you have in Quebec City, and
Yes.
and is
Yes.
and is passionate about the federal NDP. So I think like that kind of like that was a random encounter, but outreach, there's so much more potential than we've been able to find. I think the problem has not been giving up on Quebec or focusing on Quebec. I think it's hoping for lightning to strike again and an
Mhm.
imagination that the vague orange would would repeat in the way that it did. Like I how some people say don't the big mistake is fighting the last election. I think in a way the NDP has been stuck in the romance of 2011,
Mhm.
and and that it's been a way of like this is how we did it with Jack. And I actually think we're in a completely new political landscape. We need a completely new approach to everything, including and especially Quebec. And I think the notion that it will come back again, that the orange wave will suddenly return, is maybe been a burden
Mm.
on the party's approach to Quebec. And we need to start from scratch because we're basically at scratch in Quebec. Um, and so I'm excited about that possibility of leaving behind this attempt to recapture and actually finding a completely new path. Because I think
Mm.
the electoral potential in Quebec is amazing. I don't think it's going to happen instantly because there is a lot of what our campaign manager, Savannah, has called NDPTSD out there. And I think in Quebec, it's pretty deep because the province doesn't feel connected to the party really at all at this point.
Yeah, maybe in more English speaking parts of the province, but I think it's more like the NDP just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's not on people's
Factor.
radar at all. So I have one last question for you before we get to some more quick "Where were you?" questions, and
Okay.
this is a last minute question given what's going on in the world right now. So of course, we're all watching the Middle East. We're all watching Iran. Uh, who are you looking to right now for analysis and to form your own opinion on what's happening there? And what do you think Canada should do right now, given that we've got a prime minister that has apparently supported regime change without any checking in with Parliament or Canadians in general?
Or maybe even he didn't even talk to cabinet. It's unclear.
Yeah.
And it's just such a stark contrast with Mark Carney of Davos. It's been really dispiriting to watch the instant support and even just the amount of that statement that he put out that referred to the nuclear threat, which didn't Trump say that last June that they'd obliterated it and there were all those Israeli attacks that were targeting nuclear facilities and scientists. And I mean it's the at least at least in the invasion of Iraq they made a show of going to the United Nations and Colin Powell holding up the vial of like whatever
Mhm.
that stuff was, and like they pretended that there was a threat. They invented a threat and actually tried to pretend document it. This is so illegal.
Mhm.
And Canada's prime minister, who just spoke up for international law and the role of middle powers and the US hegemon, I mean, it's like it's whiplash. And I think the NDP is really important in these moments to just be a voice of moral clarity. I think on the question of Iran, it's like I spent a year in Argentina making my first documentary film, and there are certain countries like Argentina that have just immensely complex political cultures, and
Mhm.
I think Iran is an immensely complex political culture, especially the diaspora. And Khamenei was, just widely hated. Obviously, has some support within the country, but just was a vicious authoritarian ruler who crushed every single movement of dissent and consolidated control and rule the country with an iron fist. And you know, it's you don't get to just take out bad leaders with bombs. It's just not how it fucking works.
Mm,
And if Canada is going to be okay with that, what else are we okay with? I just don't like, I don't believe that Canadians are up for this. The fact that the Conservatives and the Liberals are in lockstep on this, that Jason Kenney is keep cheering on Mark Carney, is a reminder of the vast progressive majority in Canada that the NDP can speak to, and how urgent it is for us to recover party status and recover our ability to be a major player, to speak clearly in these moments and say war is never the answer. And why the hell is Canada supporting Donald Trump, who is tromping around the world in exercises of impunity and brute force and working hand in glove with Israel, which is still committing genocide in Gaza, which the genocide has not stopped, right?
mhm,
With hundreds and hundreds of people killed since the so-called ceasefire. And why are we getting in bed with people who are destabilizing the entire planet? So yes, in my world, there are Iranian Canadians, there are foreign policy folks, there are people in the wider Muslim community. There's our campaign team, and we took a bit of extra time. Also, didn't help that when it happened, I was in the Mountain Time Zone. But like we took some time to write a statement that we felt would express the pain and anguish, the moral outrage of this moment, and the contradictions in Canada's apparent role in this terrible, terrible violence that is going to be unleashed now. And that is what the NDP is for.
mm,
That's what the NDP can be at its best. And we need to start building power so we can win government and not do these things. And actually play a role that we've seen Spain play within NATO, rejecting the 5%, withdrawing, and back closing, offices, and taking real measures against Israel, economic sanctions, and like playing a moral role on the world stage. Ireland, there are other middle powers who are able to channel so much more moral clarity. We
mhm,
want Canada to be that kind of country.
mhm,
And the NDP, for all of our contradictions and complexities and failures and flaws, we are the only party that can actually speak to a progressive majority of Canadians that want to see Canada occupy a place of moral clarity on the world stage. And I think that's why it's so important that we fight for an NDP that can do that.
mm. And the block. I have to say that because I'm here.
Sure, sometimes the block, but I don't know. I didn't. Blanchette's first statements
I
on
haven't.
attacks on Iran
I'm
were,
not sure now. No,
yeah,
I mean, in the past they've played that role. They
fair,
have they've abandoned their foreign policy
right,
justice approach.
yeah,
Okay, so here's some rapid fire questions.
okay.
Where were you for the Summit of the Americas protest in Quebec City in 2001?
Getting gassed in the streets with you.
I wasn't here. I wasn't here.
You
I was
were
16 years
not
old. I was at U of T at a
you
conference,
were
but
how old?
I was 16.
Okay. Oh, okay. There are 16-year-olds there.
There
I was
were. I tried to get my parents to let me go, but I got to go to a conference at U of T, which was also crazy because I'm not from Toronto, and so I went for
right.
the conference. Yeah,
Okay. Well, I was trying to get to the fence because I
yeah,
wanted to see the catapult with the teddy bear,
yeah.
because a bunch of activists were lobbying, trying to lob a teddy bear, and there was a street hockey game in front of the fence in Quebec City, and I think most the only people who could stay in the game had my gas masks. There was so much tear gas, like it, and it's also striking that in 25 years, the amount of unknown toxic gas agents that are being poured onto a massive crowd of peaceful protesters, that was a story back then. That was a scandal back
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't, and it hasn't been for the last couple of decades in Canada. So yeah, I was crying and crying and trying to get closer, and from the tear gas.
Right.
Yeah,
Did you have an affinity group? Did you have a name for your affinity group?
we didn't have an affinity group because Naomi and I were both there as journalists.
Oh, okay.
And so we were trying to do what we could to cover the movement, because there was so much coverage from the inside, and that's always been our role. So
Yeah.
there's a shot in the beginning of the Take, our first documentary film, in the intro section of us walking down the street in Quebec City, sharing like a vinegar soaked handkerchief, like back and forth bandana, as we were, just needing to get a break from all the gas.
All right. Okay, well, fast forward 2 years after that, where were you on February 15th, 2003, the day the world said no to war?
Where was I in the massive, massive protests? I remember the protests, but I wasn't. There was some reason I wasn't in them.
Hmm.
It must have been, oh, because we were making the take, and in February 2023 we had come back from Argentina, and I think I was sinking into the edit. And so I was grappling with a year's worth, 400 hours worth of footage, and trying to figure out how to make a movie. And I was not in the streets on the greatest anti-war day of modern political history.
It happens. Me neither. I was
Yeah.
also doing a documentary in grade 13 on tattooing,
Okay.
so fair enough.
Parallel
I've
track.
never
Okay.
It was the first and the last documentary I ever worked on.
Can't say the
Okay,
same.
where were where were you the day of Stephen Harper's apology to First Nations people, which was June 11th, 2008?
Yeah, I was working for Al Jazeera, and I had moved to DC, where I was starting the show Fault Lines. I founded that show, co-founded that show with a bunch of other folks, and so it was, the CBC was no longer interested in what I was offering after Harper was elected in 2006. So my CBC career came to an abrupt end. And I got a surprise phone call from Al Jazeera English, and was asked to launch this show called Fault Lines, which had a different name at the time. It was called Inside. It was called Frontline USA,
Hmm.
and I told the executives in Qatar that there's already a show in America called Frontline. It's a PBS documentary show that's been on the air for like 50 years. You can't call it that. They were like, yeah, it's no problem. And then a year later, they got a lawyer's letter and they had to change the name a couple times. But I was co hosting a show that was a weekly magazine format show essentially to explain the 2008 election
Hmm.
to an international audience. And so I watched the Harper apology speech from Washington D.C., and it was a really interesting moment to be in D.C. and in the American political context and watch the arch conservative prime minister make this apology, which I think was a complex political moment anyway.
Hmm. Hmm.
Especially if we've seen that the conservative movement embracing residential school denial, from that moment to this, there's been a lot happening in conservative world. And of course, it was painfully ironic that it was a conservative prime minister who ended up making that apology in the first place. So I remember going through all the big feelings in this weird apartment hotel that I was living in 4 blocks from the White House in Washington.
All right. Where were you when you heard that Jack Layton had died?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
That's okay.
Yeah, in
Yep.
Toronto. I was in Toronto, but I don't remember the moment.
Hmm.
Um, I remember the sadness, but I don't remember
Hmm.
the moment.
Okay. More sadness. Where were you the night of the shooting at the Islamic Cultural Center in Quebec City?
I was also in at what was the year?
2017. So it's
17.
January 29th, 2017.
Yeah, it was. We were in BC. I remember I woke up and learned about it on when I checked the news that morning.
Hmm.
And we were in Half Moon Bay on the Sunshine Coast. And yeah, I remember the floor dropping below me and realizing what was being unleashed in terms of Islamophobia in Canada.
Hmm.
Um, it was an unforgettable moment, and I think it was a political sea change that, and I want to call out your reporting and your maintaining the focus on that moment, Nora, because there's a before and after in terms of Islamophobia and the social and political permission for it.
Hmm.
That moment changed everything, and the fact that it's gotten worse since that moment, and uh, is utterly devastating, but that you've been really consistent on refocusing Canada on that moment, and I think it was a profound moment. And yeah, 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 I remember that morning.
Yeah, well, in a week or so, I've got a feature coming out in the Walrus on the far right, Quebec City, in the military combination. So
Oh
watch out for
wow.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Back to, I'm kind of sad, but not that sad. Where were you for the final show of the Tragically Hip?
I that one was, I kind of caught it on TV. I never actually watched the whole show. I saw songs, but that Gord Downey moment in the suit, oh my god. It was yeah, we've lost some really important cultural leaders. I think there's a sort of a feeling about Gord Downey, which is sort of similar to Jack Layton,
Mm,
in that there was someone in the prime of their creative powers, that was taken in a really public way because they were honest with Canada about what they were going through. And I
mhm,
think, um, again, not to make it too personal, but the way that your cancer journey, you've been open about it, I find it really moving. And I think that Gord did that. You know, he didn't hide, and the way that he shared what it was like to go through a mortal experience, an existential experience, a health crisis like that, made that, I think, was why people, yeah, that it was such a landmark moment. The
mhm.
vulnerability of power, like being a public person and being prepared to be vulnerable about the most intimate thing of like health. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Where were you when the Raptors won the NBA Finals against Golden State?
I was being a baseball fan.
So far, no one actually remembers that one. No, we've got no
I
basketball
was like, I
fans.
found, I watched, I found out on the news the next day, and I was like, oh my god, are the Raptors that good? Oh, this is
Yeah, yeah,
embarrassing. This is embarrassing. I played a little basketball in high school, um, but I was so bad.
right.
But I was on the 15 and under team for a couple of years, and I rode the bench until finally Nick Saul. You know Nick Saul, who started the Stop in Toronto. The organization is called Right to Food, now
Hmm.
a national food advocacy organization. He just was. I went to high school with him. He was the point guard with the sweet outside shot, and there was no. I was short and fast, so that was the only role available to me. And finally, he got injured, and I got to start a game, and that was like the pinnacle of my career.
Oh my
And
god.
that's where my basketball career ended. Yeah.
Okay, fair
Yeah.
enough. Well, the last question is this has been, I think, my favorite question to ask people. Where were you when you realized that we were living in a pandemic, that the pandemic was real?
In New Jersey, in across the river from New Brunswick, New Jersey. So Naomi got this job at Rutgers University, and they hired me to teach a course as a partner hire. Which I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but it's like a weird thing that universities do. They, if they want an academic, they hire their partner.
Yep.
So
I did not get that offer. I got an offer of free French classes, but had I had higher credentials, I would have gotten into something.
I have a dusty BA from the early 19 mid and 1980s, but like, but I was teaching a course about documentary filmmaking, which I
Ah,
know a thing or two about.
right.
Not the theory of it, but like how it's actually done. So that was lovely. But we were very close to the epicenter, and um, it was so intense in New Jersey, an hour from New York City, and I remember one of the realest moments was Katie McKenna, our longtime colleague, who was the executive director of the Leap, came to visit, and was doing some fundraising meetings in New York City, and she was one of the first people in Canada, I think, to get COVID, and
Mm.
she got long COVID, and so we hugged goodbye, and she went home. And 2 days later, I think, let us know that she had gotten COVID. So we thought we were going to get it. And it was wild in New Jersey. The hospitals filled up instantly. They set up tents in the parking lots, um, and it was Trump's America. And it was
Mhm.
just like the bleach and all like the craziness of that being in the United States for that moment. Um, and we came home as soon as the term ended. Everything went online. We came home as soon as the term ended, to British Columbia, and almost had like a kiss the ground moment when we arrived at Vancouver Airport, and never went back. We ended up moving out of our apartment in New Jersey over Zoom because we were teaching
Wow.
on Zoom anyway. And it was like, why would we go back to the United States right now? And when we're working on our computers anyway. But yeah, being in Jersey was a really intense way to go through the beginning of COVID, and the online Darwinian rush for masks and sanitizer and all that stuff. We went through all of that in our rented house in New Jersey. Confusingly, New Brunswick, New Jersey is where
That's
the Rutgers campus is. So
you actually lost me the first time you said that. I was just
yeah, I
like
know.
in a haze of what
We
the
told
hell
people
kind
we're
of name is
moving to
that?
New Jersey, and they were like, "Oh, where are you living in New Jersey?" We were like, "New Brunswick," and they're like, "I thought you said you were going to New Jersey." It's like,
Right.
no, it's yeah,
Yeah.
there's a
Not
town.
even possible.
Yeah.
Well, Avi, this has been lots of fun. Thank you so much and good luck with the race.
Thank you, Nora. Thanks for doing this. And I can't wait to see what all the other candidates said to all these excellent questions, especially the where were you questions. Those are some of them were hard.
Some people struggled with some of them,
Yeah.
but it's fun to see who's the hip fans among the crowd and who's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.